Welcome to Behind the Headlines. What's been an extremely busy week for local news in Palo Alto. We had two blockbuster stories happen this week. First, the school district in an uproar over administrators' response to alleged incident of sexual assault last October. And then more recently, yesterday, we had a huge announcement of a deal being reached between Buena Vista mobile home park residents and the property owner and the city, which will preserve the mobile home park and keep it from being converted. So we're going to touch on both stories today, and we're going to start with the Pally story. And I know Elena's been working overtime this week, chasing all this. So I guess this whole uproar kind of emerged after a KTVU hat tip ran a story on May 11th about this, and there's been a lot of conversation about what the board did. Can you go a little bit into explaining what the school district's reaction was to this story?
Mm-hmm. So yeah, this story broke last week, and it had not been publicly known beforehand. And so I think people were pretty shocked to learn that a current student who was still attending school and on sports teams at the time, he left school this week. He had been accused of sexual assault on campus and also convicted for an off-campus sexual assault with an MA student. And he'd been convicted in juvenile court, so found to have done this. And the district had been notified about that in January, had known about the incident on campus months before that, and it took until March of this year to launch a formal Title IX investigation, and then obviously it wasn't until news reports that it was known more widely that this even happened. So
they learned about it in January, they waited until March to file this?
They learned about the conviction in January, and they've...
So what did they do between January and March? Just a quick question. Do we have any idea?
That is an unanswered question. There are a lot of unanswered questions at this point. Even I've talked to board members who have said there was a lot of questions or information we're looking to get, and we have not yet received that. The board decided this week that they're going to bring in this nationally renowned law firm, Cozen O'Connor, their attorneys have done really high-profile Title IX investigations, like at UVA. Everyone remembers the Rolling Stone story there. Right. Yeah. All of that. They've done Baylor, Occidental. So they're going to investigate the district's handling of this whole situation. And that law firm is already also involved with the district to handle fresh investigations into past sexual harassment and sexual misconduct cases as part of their resolution agreement with the Office of Civil Rights. And that's something that really compounds this whole thing, is that the district has been for years under investigation by the federal government for very similar breaches of what appear to be breaches of policy in federal law. Failing to promptly investigate, not really understanding the obligation to investigate things that happen on campus, or off campus, but might affect students on campus. So there's really familiar patterns that the district's already sort of been reprimanded for by the federal government happening again.
So I know we still have, you mentioned a lot of unanswered questions, but so are you suggesting there's signs already that there's these kinds of policy oversights that we've seen in the past are applied to this situation as well?
It seems like it. I mean, even if what happened in October, which was in a bathroom on campus between a freshman and this junior student, the student was actually charged with consensual underage sex, which is a crime in California, but if they believed it was consensual, still probably should have launched a Title IX investigation to find out why kids are having sex on campus in the bathrooms. Right. And then in January, certainly when they found out about his conviction, even though it was off campus with a non-PAUSD student, if they already had an issue with this student, that could have been another point that you launched an investigation. So that's a huge part of it, just their timeliness and response. And
I understand the investigation is centering on 3 people in particular, or at least more than others. Can you tell us who are the 3?
You mean the district staff?
Yes.
Yeah, so the board held a closed session meeting to evaluate Superintendent Max McGee, the principal of Pally, Kim Diorio, and then Holly Wade, who is the district's chief student services officer, and she also oversees Title IX compliance. And Holly's actually leaving at the end of the year anyway, but they really need a Title IX coordinator who truly understands, the ins and outs of Title IX, what the district's obligations are, especially considering all these past, cases.
But this assault with this student at Pally, Didn't this happen in when did the school?
That was in
district
October.
That was October,
and it was
right?
reported immediately. Yeah.
Right, it was reported immediately. But what happened? Can you just sort of tell us what happened with the student involved in this incident? At that point,
the female student.
No, the male student who was involved in this.
He was disciplined, so it was treated as a discipline rather than a Title IX issue, which is another something that has happened in past cases.
Do we know what the discipline amounted to?
On the record, I don't know.
Okay.
The district isn't allowed to talk about student discipline publicly. So he was on the football team at the time, and he didn't play the last 3 football games in October, so it does appear that, and I don't know if that was the football coach's decision or part of his suspension, so he was disciplined in some way, but the fact that it was treated as a discipline issue rather than a Title IX issue that needed to be investigated, and an investigation doesn't assume any guilt also, it's just finding out what happened, collecting information, talking to everyone involved, finding out if this has happened with other students, and then you proceed forward with if something further needs to happen.
Now, we focused so far on the school district administrators, but I want to ask you about the school board. When did the Board of Trustees learn about the October 2016 incident, and what were their reaction once they found out, leading up to the closed session this week, which we're going to get to again in a second?
It sounds like they were told at the time that this happened in October, but it was described as sort of a sexual incident that was being handled as a disciplinary case. So whether or not they should have pressed harder, given their knowledge of the history and OCR investigations of what exactly does that mean, that's another question.
Incident's pretty broad term, right?
Yeah, it wasn't, and I don't think that they were provided with too many details. And then
So sexual assault wasn't used at the time to describe what happened?
I don't believe so.
Okay.
And then they also weren't notified until about the student's conviction, which happened in January, until late March. So that's another issue about sort of communication and when the board is informed about these kind of issues.
Now, why did it take them until this week? Was it just simply because KTVU ran the story and other media outlets kind of followed up and there was all this? Is this why they did it this week? Why not have this closed session in March or whatever?
Yeah, I mean, it was really spurred by the public pressure that just poured out since last week and all the media attention, I think, yeah.
Now, we talked briefly a few days ago, I think, about this closed session, and you mentioned already what they came up with, but I understand the actual closed session was unlike most closed sessions. I mean, usually you're used to seeing people, they announce they're going to go in closed session. After a while, they merge and say, no reportable action, or we did this. But in this case, it was kind of a dramatic event with interludes and intermissions and other characters coming in and announcements being made in the middle. Can you talk a little about the actual meeting and kind of the news that came out of it even before the final announcement?
Yeah, I mean, I think closed session meetings aren't typically something that people pour out to speak to the board, but they have to take public comment before they go into closed session. And so numerous parents and students showed up. Not everyone spoke, but it was a full room. There was a few, TV cameras there, a lot of media.
What was the sentiment mostly?
A lot of just outrage and really people being really concerned about safety at schools. I was pretty alarmed to hear multiple parents and students talk about stalking and groping at both Pally and Guns, or reporting other incidences. And Max McGee said he wasn't aware of them. So that's, I mean, it was just really telling that this is going on at the schools all the time, and some of it's being reported of it, some of it's not. But it just underscores the importance of the people in the administrations understanding the policy, understanding their obligations under Title IX to respond when these things come up.
Yeah, because I mean, it's obviously a much bigger story if it's something that happens commonly and isn't reported.
Yeah, and it really doesn't seem, I mean, some of these are one-off different individual situations, and we don't have all the information about every single story because these are, students, and the district can't fully talk about, especially when they're minors. But, and that was part of what OCR found, that there was sort of patterns of the district's failure to comply with Title IX. And
what has Max McGee's response been so far? I mean, to this outrage, to people thinking they should have acted sooner, maybe been tougher. Has he said anything this far, or is, I know it's still early in the game?
A lot of it, he says, he can't talk about because of FERPA, which is the federal student privacy law.
So as far as he's concerned, has the district not followed any policies, or has there been any?
He hasn't really said. Yeah, I don't think he's addressed that. I think they're also waiting for this law firm to come in and do a fresh investigation of what happened. There are things that he said, he wasn't told about like the family of the Pally girl filed a restraining order in October, and Pally was aware of this, but Max has said that his office wasn't made aware of it. So there might be some communication breakdowns that
Imagine that.
also compounded this whole thing.
Well, I think the one party that we need to address is the students, because we've talked a lot about administrators, but I understand this actually affects the student body quite a bit, and there's been quite a reaction on campus with students addressing this. And you actually had a story in today's Weekly in addition to the news of the law firm describing how the students are reacting. Can you talk a little bit about what they're doing and how they're reacting to this?
Yeah, so pretty quickly students started reacting. I mean, I know that they were all talking amongst themselves just on social media and being really shocked about this. One student started a GoFundMe campaign to buy one wristband for every student at Pally, and the wristbands say, "I stand with victims of sexual assault," and she gave them out with other students this week at lunch.
Did she give them to the administrators as well?
I don't know. That would be a good question.
Okay.
Things like that. Some students wore white to school on Monday in support of the victims. So there's really, I mean, I think there's a sense that also this is all going on under the surface, and students are probably the people who find out about these kind of things first and know and hear rumors and know the students involved. So when it's recognized more publicly, I think, I mean, they want to see some really strong action response taken.
There's been a lot of discussion about rape culture.
Yeah.
And I believe it was a Verdi magazine the students actually put out
a few years ago.
Years ago, they did reporting on that. So how does this all fit into that whole issue, and what has the school done, if anything, to address that when this has already been brought up some time ago?
Yeah, I mean, and that was the Verde story was also part of what launched the OCR investigations. I mean, I think there's certainly things that have been put into place in terms of training, and they try to talk about consent there's a required living skills class at the high schools and things like that, and just bringing awareness to the issues. But I mean, rape culture is such an embedded, entrenched thing, and these kind of news stories sort of raise flags about how that's being it's playing out among students. So that's a hard question to answer.
Well, there's also been a whole kerfuffle about the sex education program at the school.
Yeah.
So, I mean, does this whole issue that's now coming up kind of give you any indication of, is that going to be an important thing? Is it, there was such a fuss about that. I'm wondering at this point how that will be perceived. How is the
I mean, some parents who are really supportive of the new sex ed curriculum, and I should say that the strongest controversy around that was because it was for the middle schoolers being taught at 7th grade. But the issue with sex ed at the high schools is, so living skills is this graduation requirement, and that's when all those sort of topics are covered. But because it's a graduation requirement, it's sort of its reputation is that it's an easy class. A lot of students save it to take until second semester senior year. So they they might go through all of high school without getting a fresh sex education class. So some parents are saying it should really be either, like a requirement for freshman year or something you do all 4 years. And the thing about the new sex ed curriculum is it's really not just like the birds and the bees or the biology of it. It's really about healthy relationships and consent and gender identity, sexual orientation. It's sort of a progressive view of going beyond just, I think, the basics of sex ed, so that kids can talk and understand more about those topics.
So they really can find themselves. I remember looking at some of the scenarios that you wrote about, and in those scenarios, it's really about decision making and understanding that this is a point, when no means no, that type of thing. And so it seems as though, well, you don't really know. I mean, I hesitate to use the word sexual predator in this case, but there is a point at which no amount of sex education is going to help certain individuals to discern when they're right from wrong. So,
but just one last quick question. Just returning to the board's action, Cozen O'Connor. So they're going to have this investigation. Based on your conversations with the school board, is this investigation more about kind of improving policy, seeing what went right, what went wrong, or is this kind of like a should these people lose their jobs kind of investigation?
I mean, they said it's going to be used in their evaluation of the superintendent in June. So I think it's pretty clear. I mean, it is an investigation into how district staff responded and handled it. And they have said specifically it'll inform their evaluation of Max. So
So, and Kim D'Orio as well, I take it? Or?
They didn't say that, but I mean, she's certainly involved in the response, but they explicitly said it about Max's evaluation, and that's happening in June.
Well, we'll look forward to seeing with that report what Cozen O'Connor digs up on this, and thanks again for your amazing reporting. Well, as those lawyers get to work, other lawyers will conclude their years-long effort over Buena Vista, which is the other story this week. Sue, you spent some time last night with the residents of Buena Vista Mobile Home Park, who were, I'm hearing, were pretty jubilant about this recent news.
Yes.
So first of all, let's talk a little bit about what the news is. For years, they've been kind of in limbo. There were plans to sell the property. And this week, there was a big announcement yesterday. And tell us about the announcement.
Okay, so the announcement was that the property owner, the Gisler family, has entered into an agreement with the county housing authority of Santa Clara County to actually purchase the property for more than $40 million. And in doing that, they'll be saving 400 residents from being evicted. So this is a big move, a big announcement after years of fighting and recriminations and lawsuits and you know, really it's as Winter Dellenbach said, who was the you know, she's been a proponent of the I guess she doesn't like to call it affordable housing, the low-income housing.
She's and founder of the Friends of Buena Vista.
Friends of Buena Vista. She said it's Palo Alto, you know, a shining moment for Palo Alto to really, you know, show the good side of its soul, basically.
Yeah, shining moment for winter. Tall Tree Award one day, then Buena Vista saved the next day.
Right.
But as you mentioned, it's been a long journey since 2012. That's when the Gisler family announced that they're going to do this. And the one thing that's really striking to me about this deal is the complexity, the number of parties it took. This isn't just a case of one nonprofit buying a mobile home park. This took the city pledging money, the county pledging money. The housing authority, which is different from the county.
the operator of Caritas, who will be basically the tenant, you know, overview tenant, basically.
And Dr. Ben Carson, or rather his predecessor, Julian Castro, at HUD, which is amazing. The feds are contributing $26 million.
$26 million.
That's also huge news. This kind of gets buried behind, like, under $26 million from HUD and the Trump administration.
So the county will contribute $14.5 million, and so will the city of Palo Alto, coming out of their affordable housing fund. So that is going to cover most of, you know, it covers $29,000. $29 million, excuse me, of the money that's going to go to the Gislers. And then on top of all of this, in the $26 million, there's going to be about $15 million that's hanging out there for, ostensibly for repairs and upgrades, also at the mobile home park, because it's been left in disrepair for many years.
Right.
What does this mean? All the lawsuits are just going to go away? I mean, weren't there several lawsuits sort of
both sides were suing the city?
Yeah, I assume that this is going to be the end of it. I don't think anybody wants to continue this kind of, you know.
It is a moot point because the lawsuit from the residents was over the closure application. And it's not going to get closed. But
yeah, so I don't think that's going to.
It's going to save a lot of money with both sides now. But another interesting thing, Gislers have been saying for years that they don't want to sell it. What changed now? I mean, I think I can guess, but I wanted to hear if you.
Nobody really knows, but I'm assuming it's money and, you know, just time, and also the fact that the county was looking at if they couldn't come up with an agreement, there was going to be possible eminent domain.
That was my guess.
Forward. Yeah, that was your guess. So, it's just the same that Gislers didn't want to be strong-armed into a sale, and I think that it took a tremendous amount of diplomacy on the part of the county, on the part of County Supervisor Joe Simidian and others who sat down.
I'm going to give Eshu credit for the HUD money. So.
Yes, Eshu got the HUD money, but I mean, in terms of just sort of soothing the anger, I think, and you know, that was probably came more at a local level.
So are we assuming that the Gisler family was not strong-armed in this case?
I'm not going to make that assumption.
That's what I thought I heard.
No, I can't make any assumption about what it was.
Because it's possible they didn't have a choice. We don't know. We weren't there during these negotiations. But now that you have eminent domain, suddenly they're selling.
And they were losing in the court too. Let's not forget that they, you know, the federal court said you've basically lost your you've lost your time to appeal on this to us because you can't even do it. You didn't do it at the Superior Court level first, which you were supposed to do, and so basically.
So they have legal leverage, they have political leverage, and they have eminent domain leverage, and that's what it took to get to this deal.
Yeah.
But I wanted to ask, tell me about last night. I mean, I guess the residents got together to talk about this.
Got together
set the scene for us.
At Barron Park Elementary School, and I don't think everybody was there. But, of course, the mood was jubilant, and people were clapping, and they were happy, and they gave Supervisor Simidian got a Save Our Homes T-shirt, and there was cake cutting, and people just said, it's really going to change our lives now that we also feel that our community, the greater Palo Alto, views us as part of the community, as a part, as separate from, let's just keep you on the side and get rid of you because you don't live up to the economic standards that the rest of us have. So I think that really meant a lot, and people are really just looking forward to getting on with their lives and working with a new operator, which will probably come. They'll meet with Caritas, who will be the new landlord, so to speak.
They're a nonprofit based in Irvine, right?
Yes, yes, and they're going to be they will be the tenant, the overall tenant for the entire property, and then they will work with the residents.
Is there any sense at this time what the timeline is for these improvements we were talking about?
No.
The utility lines?
No, there's nothing really going. They're immediately going to start working on doing assessments. So they're going to look at all the documentation related to the property. They're going to do tours of the property and really try to assess what the needs are. They know that there's going to be infrastructure needs. They need to look at the upgrading electricity, water, sewer, so on and so forth. Everything basically needs to be worked on.
So, okay. So it's not going to happen.
There's no price tag that's really been put out there about what this is going to cost, but I imagine they must have some sort of ballpark figure in mind from previously looking at the site. Seeing as they've got an additional $15 million to play with, I think that's probably going to figure prominently in terms of covering a lot of the costs of not all of
If
it.
Buena Vista had closed, what kind of a blow would that have dealt to the number of affordable housing or the affordable housing availability in Palo Alto? I mean, would that have been a significant chunk of it?
Yeah, and they would have taken out, let's say that's
huge.
basically
It's 111 units?
117 units
Yeah.
of affordable housing.
Yeah.
So it really would have been a setback, and it would have made all of those people probably have to fade away into other communities much further away than Palo Alto. And the school district was also, you had a lot of these kids are in Palo Alto School District.
Yeah.
And especially at Barron Park Elementary, they were talking about that as well. They'd lose a significant chunk of students there.
Yeah.
So.
And they're going to have some familiar neighbors, right? From what I hear as part of the deal.
They are going to have.
Let's talk about that part of the deal.
Landlord will actually, their former landlord, or is current until this deal is finalized, will be their new neighbor because they're going to basically subdivide the property. They have, in addition to the mobile home park, the Gissers also own a commercial strip mall area and a gas station. So they're going to retain that. So that's one of the things, one of the hurdles that's still left to go through is to do the subdivision.
So they still got Baja Fresh. They lost the mobile home park. But
That's right. That's
okay.
right.
Well, great. Well, that was actually obviously a huge milestone, but the story's not over. We're going to be tracking next few years see how the property gets improved, how long it takes, how things change, how rents change, and whether the residents will remain engaged in the city process, which is one of the few silver linings in what has certainly been a very stressful 5 years for them. Well, that's all the time we have this week. Thanks again for joining us on Behind the Headlines. If you like what you saw, give us one of these or click subscribe. You can also follow us on Twitter at Palo Alto Weekly, on Instagram, and you could join the conversation on Town Square. Thanks again. See you next week.